You're listening to Himalayan Adventure by Vaile. Chapter 23.
Abby stepped out of the cave and into the blizzard. She wore her jacket and jeans but left the sneakers behind as usual. She didn't need the clothes to stay warm in the weather, but they served a second purpose, a disguise, in case she found Nikki. The darkness of the night would hide the rest of her features. When she zipped up her jacket, her chest fur caught in the zip and she yelped in surprise. Her brother misunderstood her exclamation and laughed. "See, I told you it was cold out there," he scoffed. Ignoring him, she moved down the hill, taking long, powerful strides through the deep snow. In moments, the cave entrance had disappeared and she was alone in the blizzard. The journey around the Vaile Glacier was a 15-kilometer round trip that would take her right up to Nepal's border with Tibet at the northern end of the glacier. She had never climbed in this part of the mountains before, but unlike her brother, she had paid attention during the Himalayan geography classes back in school at Shangri-La, so she knew quite a bit about Vaile. In her mind, she had an image of a jelly bean-shaped glacier, fat at the bottom and skinny at the top, wedged between three mountains, the smallest of those being Vaile Peak at the southern end. If she had a map to refer to, she would have been pleased to see that she was right. She passed within 100 meters of the tents, inside which were Burnmaster and the others. The tents looked like little yellow cocoons of warmth in the night. After that, she kept a steady pace for the first hour, moving comfortably through the snow which was, at times, almost waist-deep. It blanketed everything, and if Nikki was up there, any signs of her had been obliterated. Visually, Abby had little chance of finding Nikki, so she relied on her sense of smell which, like a bloodhound's, was about 1,000,000 times more sensitive than a human's. Flaring her nostrils, she sniffed the air and kept jogging. There were human scents in the air, coming from disused campsites occupied by trekkers during the recent climbing season. She inspected the area around each scent, and after she was satisfied that there was no trace of Nikki, she moved on. As she continued north, there were less and less scents until finally, at the Tibetan border, she was in a place that no human had visited in a long time. It was the middle of the night when she rounded the top of the glacier and started the run back. Several hours later, as she approached Burnmaster's camp, she was thinking of other places to continue the search. The answer was obvious: the crevasses on the Vaile mountainside. There were at least half a dozen, and Nikki could have fallen into any one of them. It would have been easier to search them with Zaw's help, but she knew what he would say to the suggestion. She started down the side of the mountain, glad to switch from jogging to climbing. Yetis loved to climb, and she was no exception. She climbed using only her claws and her strength. There was no need for rope or other equipment. Humans had a special vulnerability in the mountains that the yeti understood but didn't share. Humans could die any one of a dozen ways in the Himalayas, but about the only thing that would kill a yeti up here was old age. That was why Zaw's laziness was so pathetic. She stopped at the first crevasse and, hanging daringly over the gaping black hole, stared into its depths. The bottom was beyond the limits of her eyesight. She sniffed the air. There was no human scent and no signs of life, so she felt sure Nikki wasn't down below. The wind buffeted her body and she swayed back and forth. The image of a teenage yeti dressed in jeans and a yellow jacket dangling over a yawning chasm was something a nature photographer would sell his or her soul for. Abby felt no fear hanging by her claws, but she knew that for humans, such crevasses were a death trap, an ice tomb they couldn't climb out of. She moved on. The next two crevasses were also empty of life. She climbed for a while to get to the third, and then, as she lowered herself towards its dark mouth, she caught the unmistakable whiff of a human. Close by, down below, her pulse quickened. She hurried to the edge and stared down. The mouth of the crevasse was oval-shaped, about 5 meters wide and 10 meters long. The crevasse itself looked endlessly deep, but there was a ragged ledge along one wall, about 15 meters down. Her bright blue eyes blinked in the darkness, searching. Then she saw it, an unmoving form dressed in climbing gear, a woman with blonde hair. It had to be Nikki. Abby stared hard but couldn't tell if the human was alive. Without hesitation, she swung herself over the edge of the crevasse and started climbing down the inside wall, rapidly lodging and dislodging her claws in the ice as she went. As she got closer, she wondered how the human, for she was not yet sure it was Nikki, had avoided tumbling down the yawning chasm that was right next to the ledge. Only a stroke of incredible fortune could have saved her from the chasm and certain death. Whether that fortune was good or bad probably depended on your point of view. Slowly starving to death in an ice tomb, with no hope of rescue, would not be a nice way to go. Abby gently dropped onto the ledge and crouched beside the woman. Her eyes were closed and there were no signs of life. She was lying on her back, dressed in all of her climbing gear with her rucksack beside her. There was no reaction as the yeti drew near. Retracting her claws, Abby brushed the light covering of snow off the woman's face and leaned close, listening for breathing. The woman's face was cut and bruised and her lips were blue. For a long moment Abby detected nothing and she feared the worst. But then she felt a soft exhalation, followed by an inhalation. This woman was unconscious and injured, but she was alive, and she needed to be moved. Abby looked up the ice wall to the mouth of the crevasse 15 meters above. There was no way a human could make that climb perfectly healthy. With any significant injuries or broken bones, forget it. But Abby knew she could do it and carry this woman at the same time, whom she estimated to weigh about 50 kilograms. Precisely what she would do when she got to the top, she would worry about later. Before Abby moved the woman, she wanted some idea of her injuries. With no medical training, she did the best she could to identify any broken bones. As far as she could tell, the left arm was broken and the shoulder dislocated. The right wrist didn't look too good either. She stood back and decided things could have been worse. The woman's ribs were okay, and that meant she could safely grip her around her torso for the climb up. She found some rope in the rucksack and tied the woman's left arm against her body to secure it. The makeshift sling wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. Lifting the woman into a sitting position, she wrapped one powerful arm around the woman's ribcage and picked her up, testing her weight. Heavy to be climbing up 15 meters with, but manageable. Abby took her time with her claw placements in the ice. For yetis, climbing came as naturally as breathing and required the same degree of attention, but this climb was more difficult and the stakes were higher. One slip and they would both go sailing down into the black chasm, and given Zaw's track record, he wouldn't bother to come looking for her until the weather was good. The woman remained unconscious the whole way, her head gently lolling back and forth as if she was nodding in agreement with the yeti's climbing technique. The storm howling on the mountain became louder as Abby neared the top of the crevasse. Soon, her furry head emerged into the night and the chilly wind flattened the fur against her face. She swung one leg up, hooked her toe claws on the ice, and hauled herself out, carefully bringing the woman with her. There she lay for a few moments, lying at the edge of the crevasse, shielding the woman from the wind with her body. It was a rescue her father would be proud of, her brother too, but he would never admit it. She knew that she needed to get the woman out of the storm as quickly as possible. Humans could die in minutes in this kind of weather and were particularly susceptible to frostbite. The return trip up the mountain was easy and she climbed steadily. At the top she stood up and looked back down. The crevasse was nothing more than a black smudge far below. She set off for the snow cave, moving quickly through the knee-deep snow, carrying the woman in her arms. 10 minutes later she eased herself through the small entrance to the cave and laid her on the ground. The movement disturbed her brother's sleep. "Back so soon," he mumbled. He rolled onto his side, not bothering to look up. "I told you there was nobody out there," he said. He yawned and sniffed the air. His nostril hairs twitched and he sat up curiously. "Hey, what's that smell?" he asked. The words caught in his throat when he saw the woman on the ground. "No way, is that Zipster?" he exclaimed. "I don't know," Abby replied. "But I think so. Where'd you find her?" Zaw asked incredulously. Abby explained her run around the glacier followed by her search of the mountainside. Zaw tried not to look impressed when she described the climb out of the crevasse. "Is she alive?" he asked, looking at the woman for any signs of life. "Barely," Abby replied. "She's got a broken arm and a dislocated shoulder, probably more injuries too. She needs to get to a doctor fast." Zaw rubbed the back of his head and muttered, "Well, that's sort of a problem, this being a faraway mountain and all. We could take her to Shangri-La, but it's a few days away." And in this weather, he left the sentence hanging. "I agree, Shangri-La's out," Abby said, "so that leaves only one option." Zaw looked at his sister. "You mean Burnmaster?" he asked skeptically. "Yes," she replied. "Pemba said he has some medical training." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Zaw remarked. "I mean, medical training or not, at some point he's going to have to take her down the mountain. With the injuries she's got, that's a pretty big ask for a human. It's one thing for a yeti to carry her out of a crevasse, but another thing entirely for a human to carry her down a mountain. Maybe we should just take her down ourselves." Abby shook her head and said, "This storm will kill her and I don't think we can wait for it to pass. She needs medical attention now, so Burnmaster's the only." Just then, the woman groaned and coughed. The yetis froze. Her eyes fluttered open and stared into the darkness of the cave. With weak movements she tried to sit up but could not. Eventually she gave a weary sigh and lay still. A long moment passed before the yetis moved again. In unison, they drew the hoods of their jackets over their heads and down their faces. "She thinks she's still in the crevasse," whispered Zaw. The woman's eyes opened again, but she was blind in the darkness. "Is somebody there?" she groaned. Abby picked up the woman's gloved hand and held it. The woman wouldn't be able to feel Abby's fur through her gloves. "We're here," Abby said gently. "You're in a safe place. We rescued you from the crevasse, and now we're going to take you to a doctor." The woman turned towards the sound of Abby's voice and began to sob. She spoke through her tears, but neither of the yetis could understand what she said. Abby wished she could offer her a tissue. She looked at her brother and he made a zipper motion across his mouth, indicating only she should speak. When the woman began to relax, Abby asked what her name was. "Nikki Zipster," she replied weakly. "What's your name?" The question was unexpected. Abby hesitated, then told her. "Why is it so dark in here?" Nikki asked. "We're in a snow cave," Abby replied, and my torch ran out of batteries. Nikki accepted this and said, "I'm really thirsty. Do you have any water?" "No, but I can take you to a place that does," Abby replied. "It's not far away, but we have to go back out in the storm." Nikki nodded her agreement. Abby looked at Zaw and wordlessly gestured for him to call Pemba on the sat phone. As she picked Nikki up, the woman cried out in pain. The extent of her injuries was becoming apparent to her as she regained consciousness. "I'm a mess," she wheezed, "but I can make it." Then Abby carried her out into the blizzard. Pemba was sleeping in a cozy 3-man tent with Burnmaster and Twigger. It had been a long and restless night until sometime after midnight when he finally managed to drift off to sleep. Twig had trouble sleeping too. Burnmaster slept like a log. Pemba's sat phone began to buzz. It was so cold he was fully dressed and zipped up tightly in his sleeping bag. The phone was in his jacket pocket, so he didn't hear it ring for a while. Eventually he answered it in a sleepy voice. "Hello," he muttered. The message was short and sharp. "It's Zaw," the yeti declared. "Go outside in 10 minutes and no questions asked. Now hang up." The call ended. Pemba stared uncomprehendingly at the sat phone's luminous face for a moment, still half asleep. He played the call back through his mind and wondered if this was one of Zaw's practical jokes. If it was, there would be trouble. Beside him, Twig stirred. "What was that about?" he asked. Pemba looked across and replied, "Somebody tried to call me, but it dropped out. Must be because of the weather." Twig said nothing more. Pemba snuggled back into his sleeping bag and checked the time on his wristwatch. The storm beat angrily against the tent. 10 minutes later, it was time to go. He could tell Twig was still awake. "I'm going out to take a whiz," he whispered. "Don't get lost," Twig muttered. "I ain't following no piss trail to find you." Pulling on his boots, Pemba unzipped the tent as quietly as he could and reluctantly slipped through the gap. With a bit of luck, Burnmaster would stay asleep and never know he was gone. Outside, the blizzard was as cold and inhospitable as ever. The icy wind sucked the breath from his lungs. He squinted into the storm and wondered what he was supposed to do. Zaw's instructions were uselessly brief, but he knew the yeti had done the right thing by keeping the call short. They had previously agreed that Zaw would never call him, except in an emergency. That way, Burnmaster and the others wouldn't get suspicious about who he was talking to all the time. The gale picked up tempo and he began to shiver. Emergency or not, whatever it was, it had better be good. He decided to move further away from the tents to allow the yetis to safely appear. He didn't want to go too far because getting lost in this storm was a real possibility. He counted his steps to keep track of how far he had traveled. When he hit 30, a dark shape suddenly materialized in front of him. He jumped back in surprise, then realized it was Abby. "Geez, you half scared me to death," he exclaimed. She placed her finger on his lips and he stopped talking. Up close now, he realized she was carrying another person and it wasn't Zaw. "This is Nikki Zipster," Abby whispered. Pemba's surprise was momentary. In the back of his mind, he had known this could happen. Abby carefully removed the rope she had used to secure Nikki's dislocated shoulder, then motioned for Pemba to support Nikki. She described what had happened as she transferred her weight to him. He accepted it without hesitation. She was his responsibility now. "Thank you," he said quietly. By the time he turned around, Abby had disappeared into the night. It was a slow trip back to the tents. He wasn't strong enough to carry her the way Abby had, so he supported her by draping her good arm over his shoulder. He spoke words of encouragement the whole way. Every step he took, she managed to take one. Her feet dragged through the snow. At the tent, he unzipped the entry flap and helped Nikki inside as best he could. It was as dark in the tent as it was outside in the night. Snow flurries began to fill the interior. Twig complained but shut his mouth when he heard the unfamiliar female voice wince in pain. Pemba, is that you? Asked Twig. Yeah, it's me, he replied, and I've got Nicky Zipster with me. I found her outside, she's in a bad way. Nicky Zipster, Twig exclaimed, scrambling around for a torch. When he found one, he flicked it on and shone it at the unmoving form lying on the ground. The noise woke Burnmaster, and Pemba explained the situation. After recovering from the initial shock of seeing Nicky in his tent, he went to work. 1,000 thoughts raced through his head, but he tuned them out and focused on the important thing, keeping her alive. There would be time enough later for questions. The vital medical treatment that he provided to her from that moment on confirmed in Pemba's mind that Abby had made the right decision to bring the injured woman to Burnmaster. Had she remained in the crevasse or even in the Yeti's snow cave, she probably would have died within 12 hours. Twigger raced over to the other tent and woke Laheeti, Isabelle, and Gulbenkian. When they heard that Pemba had found Nicky Zipster, they scrambled over to Burnmaster's tent and peered through the door flap. Burnmaster shooed them away, stating that he needed to keep the inside of the tent as warm as possible. Nicky's life depended on it. They waited outside for a while, but when the cold got to them, they retreated to their tent. The commotion woke the GXs, and they lumbered through the snow to Burnmaster's tent. Their resplendent silver hair shone like Christmas tinsel in the blizzard. Maine's long locks twisted in the wind like a living creature, and Mohawk's vertical grill lacked its usual verve. Maine rapped on the door flap and bellowed, "What's going on?" "Is everything all right?" Burnmaster inched the zipper open. "Everything's fine," he replied. "Pemba found Nicky and she's in here now." That comment got Flat Top's undivided attention. "Nicky Zipster's in there right now?" he asked in his best interrogation voice. "Yes," came Burnmaster's reply through the tent. "She's injured but alive. The next 24 hours are going to be tough. Hopefully she'll be okay." Flat Top grabbed the small silver zipper with his enormous hand and slowly began to unzip the entry flap. Burnmaster saw what was happening and demanded that the tent remain closed for warmth. Flat Top ignored him. When the tent was wide open and snow was blowing inside, Burnmaster and Flat Top glared at one another at point-blank range. "Close this damn tent now, or I'll," yelled Burnmaster. "Or you'll what?" growled Flat Top scornfully. "Get out of the way, I want to see Zipster." Burnmaster stood his ground. "I'm warning you," he seethed. "She doesn't need an audience, and she doesn't need a tent full of snow. So get out and shut the damn tent, or I'll kick you off this expedition, and you can find your own way down the mountain." Mohawk put a restraining hand on his brother's shoulder and said, "Now's not the right time." His grip became firmer, and he forcefully guided Flat Top away. Burnmaster gave the giant GX one more angry stare, then quickly zipped up the tent. Flat Top's frustration levels went to boiling point. When Burnmaster's tent was out of earshot, he shouted, "What the heck are you doing? Nicky Zipster is in that tent. This is what we've been waiting for. Once she tells us where the Yeti tooth is, we can retrieve it and return to North Korea." Neither Mohawk nor Maine could imagine anything they wanted less. "Hold on," yelled Maine over the wail of the storm. "What's your plan, to go in there and squeeze her for information?" Flat Top shrugged his huge shoulders. "Of course," he roared. "What else am I going to do?" "Ask nicely, think it through," Maine pressed. "What if she's too sick to talk? From the sounds of things, she's in and out of consciousness. If that's the case, no amount of squeezing is going to get us the information we need. Instead, all you'll do is blow our cover and kill our only link to the Yeti tooth." Mohawk nodded. "I agree," he said. "She's best left in Burnmaster's hands at the moment. Once she's recovered, we can reconsider how to get the information from her." Flat Top loathed any plan that didn't involve immediate action or gratuitous violence. He looked from one face to the other and scowled. His brother's logic was sound, but yet again their proposals resulted in more delays to the mission. At this rate, they would be old men before they found the Yeti tooth. "I'll wait a couple of days, but that's it," he snarled. "After that, Zipster had better be well enough to tell me where the tooth is, or she'll die trying." Maine and Mohawk nodded in agreement. 2 days wasn't much, but it would do for now. And with a bit of luck, by the time the 2 days were up, they would have thought of another excuse to keep everybody alive for a little longer. The storm continued for another 36 hours. Everybody remained in their tents. On the morning of the 3rd day, they awoke to find clear blue skies and pristine weather conditions. The glacier sparkled in the morning sun. Gulbenkian set out several portable stoves and prepared cups of tea and a hot meal for breakfast. Everybody sat outside, glad that the terrible weather had finally passed. The Koreans were there too. Flat Top looked edgy, like he had something on his mind. Burnmaster was the last to emerge from his tent. As he sipped a cup of tea, Isabelle asked how Nicky was doing. Better than I thought she would, he replied. I reset her dislocated shoulder and bandaged up her broken arm. She needs a lot more rest. Does she recognize you? Asked Isabelle. Before Burnmaster could answer, Nikki eased herself out of the tent and sat down on the snow. Everybody stopped talking and stared at her. Nikki looked from face to face. In the morning sun, she looked both beautiful and busted up at the same time. Isabelle recalled the description of Nikki that Burnmaster had given to the hotels and realized she was a perfect match. Slim, blonde-haired, brown-eyed and pretty, except for her injuries, which were plainly evident. There was a bruise on one cheek and a bandage on her forehead. Her movements looked slow and painful. Everybody gathered around. Yes, I recognize him, she said, but at first I didn't believe it. He was the last person I expected to see in Nepal. Burnmaster smiled. How are you feeling? She smiled weakly and said, like I've got one foot in the grave. After introducing her to everybody, Burnmaster asked, do you remember how you got here? Nikki raised her face to the sun and filled her lungs with the clean mountain air. After coming back from the dead, even the simple things feel wonderful. Not really, she replied after a while. The last thing I remember is, she shivered, but not because of the cold, lying in the crevasse for a long time. I remember thinking, this is it. This is where I'm going to die. Nobody's going to find me. Burnmaster frowned. What do you mean lying in the crevasse? He asked. You must have been up here on the glacier. That's where Pemba found you. No, I never made it this far, Nikki replied. One of my ice screws pulled out on the way up and I fell into a crevasse. Somehow I landed on a ledge. My food and water ran out after 3 days. After that I lost track of time, so I don't know how long it was until the lady pulled me out. Pemba watched a confused look cross Burnmaster's face. What lady? The South African asked. Nikki shrugged. I never saw her, she explained. The only thing I remember was that I was in a cave and she told me I was going to be okay. Burnmaster turned to Isabelle, the only female in the group except for Nikki. Do you know what she's talking about? He asked. Isabelle shook her head. Wasn't me. This is the first time I've spoken to Nikki, she replied. Burnmaster nodded and looked at Pemba. You found Nikki lying in the snow near the camp, right? He asked. Pemba tried hard to look as confused as everybody else. Right, he confirmed. I went out for a whiz and as I walked away from the tents I almost tripped over her. He smiled half-heartedly and added, it's lucky I walked that way, otherwise I would never have seen you. Anyway, I picked you up and brought you back. Nikki shook her head. Yes, I remember that, but a lady was there too, she said. No, no lady, Pemba replied determinedly. Just me. Well, I'm sure, Nikki pressed. I remember her voice. It sounded kind. I know that seems silly. I remember her carrying me. That was me carrying you, corrected Pemba. He glanced around, trying to gauge what the others were thinking. You were dehydrated, hadn't eaten in days. I've heard stories about climbers who have hallucinations in situations like that. You must have imagined the lady's voice. Nikki was quiet for a few moments and then said, I guess so. She looked at Burnmaster and added, but I'm not imagining you. Of all the people in the world who could rescue me, she shook her head in disbelief. What are you doing here? She asked. Looking for you, Burnmaster replied. The sign on your office door at the university said you went climbing in Langtang. When you didn't return on time, I started to get worried. She nodded. But what are you doing in Nepal? She asked. Burnmaster smiled. I'm surprised you need to ask, he said. As if I could turn down an offer like the one you made. Nikki waited for him to say more, but he remained silent. She frowned and asked, What do you mean? Burnmaster's grin broadened. You know, the letter you sent me a few weeks ago, he replied. What letter? Asked Nikki. The letter you sent me, Burnmaster explained, asking me to join you on a climbing expedition in Nepal. Nikki looked perplexed. I have no idea what you're talking about, she declared. Burnmaster's smile faded. The letter you sent me, inviting me to join you on an expedition to search for yeti, he said. You also sent me a replica of a real yeti tooth that you found in the mountains. It was clear from Nikki's blank stare that this meant nothing to her. He continued on, and a news article describing your close encounter with a yeti. Burnmaster looked around his companion's stunned expressions. Well, I've got the letter right here, he declared. He marched into the tent and came back holding up the evidence. Nikki examined the replica tooth with a professional eye, then quickly read the letter. She looked up, shaking her head. I'm sorry, but I've got no idea what you're talking about, she said. I didn't write this letter or find this tooth. I've never spoken to a journalist about anything. And I can absolutely guarantee you I've never ever seen a yeti before in my entire life. Burnmaster just stared at her. Just what the heck is going on here, he thought to himself.
That is the end of this chapter. To listen to the next chapter on YouTube or to purchase the digital ebook from Amazon, see the links in the description.